Hi everyone, and welcome to the World of Work podcast. This podcast is a topic spotlight series and brought to you by Autism Valued Incorporated, previously known as Asperger's Victoria, and in relation to our World of Work initiatives. My name is Jacob Allen, and I lead all things employment related for the AV community, and I do this work with lived experience as my backbone. With my own diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and Tourette syndrome. We are a small non-profit doing big work, and this podcast is simply a means of trying to let more people know who we are and what we do. I hope you enjoy what we have to say. Let's get into it. Hello everyone, and welcome back. In today's episode, I'm joined with the General Manager of Autism Valued, Leslie Clements. Today we're going to be talking about adjustments as performance enhancers. So Leslie, before we get into the conversation, could you just let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. My pleasure to do so. So, as you said, my name is Leslie. My pronouns are she, her. I am the General Manager at Autism Valued, which sometimes referred to as AV. I've been with AV for just over 4 years now. My connection to community is that I have 2 neurodivergent adult children, both diagnosed ADHD and autistic. They're both late diagnosed. And my additional connection to community, which is just as lovely, is that my fiancé is late diagnosed autistic. He was diagnosed at around about 51 just recently. So I am surrounded by wonderful neurodivergent people. For clarity, I do not identify as autistic. I am a non-autistic identifying person or neuronormative or neurotypical, with definitely some traits that would lean towards neurodivergent.
The way that I've sort of segmented our conversation today is the same as how they are all generally sort of conducted. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, try and get some key points from you, and hopefully we get some good content for the community. So my first question to you is, from your experience working together day by day, what's an adjustment that you've made for me or for another member of our team that you feel generally improved the performance, not just the well-being of myself or the team member?
Thank you. And I think I'm going to cover off on a few rather than just one, because I think there's a lot of things that organisations and leaders can do which aren't difficult, which can be really impactful. And so the first one is in relation to clear and concise communication. And so we know that generally autistic people really benefit from clarity and having precision in the way that you're communicating with them. And so anything that increases predictability and reliability is really impactful and quite powerful. So I've made a really concerted effort, not just with you, but also with your colleagues, to be crystal clear in terms of my preferences or requirements or my expectations, and to create that messaging with giving lots and lots of context. One of my more challenging elements, which I've come to realise over the last few years, is the more direct, often the better. And so certainly with you, one of my challenge areas has been being almost forceful and not being impolite, but having to somehow harness all of the stuff that goes on in your big, brilliant brain and be really clear about what we won't be doing and what we will be doing. And there have been times where I've said directly to you, no, Jacob, we will not do that. No, Jacob, that cannot happen. Can you focus your attention here? This is what can be done. And I've definitely felt uncomfortable with my level of directness on occasion. What has continued to surprise and delight me is that sometimes the more direct and the more crystal clear I can be, it's almost like your brain goes, oh, can't do that, can do this. And so then your energy and your focus goes into, and that hyper focus in particular goes into, all right, well, if I'm not allowed to do this, and sometimes it's almost not allowed to do this, what can I do that I am allowed to do? So as much as, I don't know whether it has ever felt a bit harsh for you when I've really pushed myself to be a bit uncomfortable, you've always responded by going, okay, cool, I'm clear now. And so I think that's not necessarily an accommodation as such, but it's definitely a work style that I've developed and worked on, being really clear.
Yeah. And I think that clarity, just kind of, I've mentioned it before, where I just go, okay, if you're happy, I'm happy. Because if it's not that clear of what you want me to do, my brain thinks of all the
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's like, there's ideas and then there's meta stuff behind that. And then there's all the, that whole pattern recognition of, I've got to plan for this, and this. And, like the podcast, for example, I planned a year ahead before we even did the first episode. And then,
and then you have to nuance it along the way,
yeah,
which is often the case with anything that you do.
And then it changed and it sort of pivots. So, me knowing that about myself, I just refer back to that and go, okay, if you're happy, I'm happy. And then also remembering what the key sort of KPIs are. I've just been like, well, you don't need to do that. Why am I working yourself up over that?
Totally.
When you clearly know what you need done. So
I think the other element that comes into that is that sense of creating appropriate boundaries. And so I think there's an earlier episode that I was listening to and you kind of went, Leslie boxes me in. And I think those were the precise words that you used.
I think they were, And
I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. And then I, took 2 seconds and went, no, he means that in a really positive way. Like I'm creating that structure and being that safety net of this is what we need to deliver, so let's focus on getting that done. That's, I think, something I've definitely also worked on in terms of working with you so that you can thrive. And then finally, if I can speak very openly about you, as a very capable, incredibly driven individual, like your energy and your passion and your connection to purpose is quite strong. And at the same time, you take setbacks they're not easy for you. And so one of the things that I've been really clear about is when I choose to give you feedback, how can I do that in a manner that still keeps that momentum available for you so that it's not just this complete derailing, which I think good leaders will do with any kind of individuals. But if you're working with neurodivergent people, the likelihood is that there is an experience of rejection sensitivity, whether they're diagnosed RSD or not. So finding a platform for letting some things slide so that you don't interrupt momentum, but also being really cautious when you are delivering feedback, you're doing so in a manner that enables that person to accumulate that knowledge, but then move forward. So that's kind of my experience with you. With other neurodivergent team members that I have the absolute pleasure of working with, I focus really intently on their preferred method of communication and have no expectations in terms of requiring them to respond in a way that works for me. So what I mean by that is one of our lovely colleagues prefers to have almost everything in Google Chat, and he will rarely respond to me with words, but we have this kind of set agreement around certain emojis. And so, if I get 100%, then I know that we're on the same path. That if I get a thumbs up, it means that. And so that enables him to assimilate the information, look at my request, and give me confidence that he's understood it and he will take action on it. So that's a really good way of kind of going, rather than what is my preferred method of communication, what is my team's preferred method of communication? We talk, I believe, in an upcoming episode about cheerleading for an autistic team member, and I do really believe wholeheartedly that if you're leading people who might be neurodivergent, I think anyone benefits from a cheerleader, but a neurodivergent person probably benefits from someone who's more vocal and more repetitive in their positive feedback. That goes for you as well. Like I think that's true for everyone, but certainly your momentum and your drive increases when you are acknowledged for the work that you're doing. And in a very different vein, I think the other thing that I've learned in terms of neurodivergent people, and I've worked with some, not everybody, and everybody's different and everyone's unique, is that you cannot, in my experience at least, you cannot out-process burnout. And so if you're working with someone who is actually in burnout, and I do mean that as a term in terms of an experience that people have, and for some a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis, there isn't that much you can do until that person's past that period. You can't create the processes, the systems, the tools, the techniques. The only real way that I've witnessed is actually in that recovery process. And so I think what happens sometimes, and I mean, I know you have some experience and you can talk about yours, but there is still a view that you just push through, and I'm yet to see someone that pushes through burnout in a way that's actually helpful and productive for them and helpful and productive for the organisation which they're working for.
Yeah, don't know if there's, productive.
No,
But yeah,
it's not usually productive.
But definitely know that, sometimes you just push through it. But if there's better things in place to be able to take that time away and just recover properly, I agree. My next question then is based on everything you've learned managing me and my ability to deliver through near burnouts and including some health and personal life challenges that I've had over the 3 years of working together.
Yeah.
What do you believe that every employer should understand about performance and adjustments?
That energy and support needs fluctuate. And particularly energy. And so my biggest kind of recognition in watching both your professional life and sometimes you're very kindly sharing your personal experiences as well, is that I don't think that you do this ever. I don't think that it goes like that for you. I think it goes and it's quite pronounced, right? And that actually riding that wave with you.
I'm glad you used those words.
Ride the wave.
Trademark.
Is so much more helpful for both of us. Yeah. Because if I required you to stagnate and somehow lineate, I don't think that's the word, but I will add it to the dictionary anyway. A linear requirement for you in terms of energy just would never work. We'd be working against your nervous system, I suspect, and working against your innateness as a person and potentially as a neurodivergent person. I think that energy fluctuation is quite normal. And similar to that as our support needs. And you don't really get an enormous amount of support needs in AV, apart from the fact that we hopefully understand neurodivergent people and create environments where they're built in as opposed to separate to the organisation. But I've definitely learned that energy fluctuates. And aligned to that, I've 100% learnt that output comes in bursts. Now, that may be ADHD, it may be autism, it may be the dual diagnosis. And so there are periods which, quite sincerely, you do like a week's worth of work in 4 hours. And then some people would potentially require employees who can do that to do that consistently. And it doesn't work like that from what I can tell. No, because you've never done that consistently, and neither should you. You shouldn't be required to produce a week's worth of work in 4 hours.
I need so much caffeine.
And there's already enough caffeine that gets consumed, I think, is what we've established. And so, and really, there have definitely been times in our working trajectory where I've thought to myself, Jacob seems a bit off track. I don't know what's going on with Jacob. I'm not sure what he's actually doing at the moment. And then suddenly you'll do 2 months worth of work in the week, and I'll be like, oh, we're back on track and we've caught up and it's all coming together. And so those output bursts are important, but the most important part is to not expect them all of the time. And to show, or even if you don't show it, to be patient knowing it's coming. Like, do you feel like sometimes you're just like, you could spend a day and you look at it and you're like, I don't know what that day was. And then the following day, it's just, it all comes together.
All the time I'm so disappointed. I'm like, I feel like I've exhausted, like I've used a lot of mental energy. I know I haven't been wasting time, but then I'm like, I don't feel like I've done much.
Yes.
And then there'll be days where I'm like, I've generally delivered. And from where you're asking about whether it's ADHD or autism, I think the output part is the ADHD, but the input part is the autism. So
that's interesting.
Even when I'm not like delivering, say, like that week's worth of work, I'm always thinking about, multiple different steps. So that's where it might be like, where's his brain at right now? I might be 6 months,
you're 6 months down the track.
So, we know with something like the Job Seeker Network, for example, where, I'm already halfway through not even finishing delivering that, I'm going, okay, well, I need to sort of think about a job like a career transitioner's roadmap, a job keeper's roadmap. And then my brain's, already thinking about that. And then sometimes it's like I've already sort of drafted the things that then come back into play 3 months. I've gone, okay, that that's not ready for it now. And then it's there. So,
you make an interesting point, don't you? Because, we were doing some grant writing recently and you were like, great, we're going to get some money. And so we'll go into this career transition. And I'm like, No. We just need to get funding for the Job Seeker Network. I'm condensing it, and you're constantly, in a really wonderful way, pushing forward and moving those boundaries and kind of going, well, let's do this as well. I think the other thing that I've learned through you and others in our wonderful team is, as much as possible, to feel really comfortable about having conversations about what's going on with your brain or your energy levels today. And that does come back to doing that myself, like, I said to you this morning, I'm in catch-up mode, but everything is good. I will often go like, this just isn't a day for me to focus, so we'll be doing that. And I think what that does for you and for others in our team is enable people to comfortably articulate, it's just not my day. And I think for any organisation, the more that you can support wellbeing through authentic and real conversations, the more likely your team will do well. And it's not difficult. It's just bringing them in more frequently. And so that's definitely something that I think we've worked on, being really honest with each other and everybody else that's in the team, having that same level of honesty. And knowing that can actually change in an instant. I had a lovely situation in the office where one of our team members got to the end of team meeting and he had that look of, I am present, but I am not here any longer.
Yeah.
So we called the team meeting to an end, and then an hour later he came back and he was energized again. And I'm like, well, what, Jack, you're good. What happened now? He said, I spent an hour with Cal. I feel a whole lot better now. And he was going again. He was able to participate in work again. But giving people that grace of, like, when they're offline and they're exhausted and they're done, to really respect that and just to go, okay, at this particular point, this needs to stop. I do recall, I'm not sure if you recall, but this was a little while ago now, where I did say to you, I think you were really, really, really extending that scenario, burning the candles at both ends, so doing an enormous amount, both professionally and personally. And I think I actually said to you, Jacob, probably in that tone, Jacob, the next picture I get from you better not be from you from a hospital bed, because we're not doing that again.
Yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes you have to be really clear around, I don't want you to work yourself into burnout. It's not healthy for you. It's definitely not healthy for the organisation, and it's not helpful either.
Yeah. And often, being in a role where you're in service of other people, you just try and find yourself pushing through and, I will often do that. And, I won't go to the doctor and be like, I'm sick, and wait until it's probably a bit too late and be like, oh, I should have spent a bit more time focusing on myself. But, going back to the whole sort of riding it like a wave, I think, there's an important element of that where maybe it's because my role is, based around deliverables rather than punching the clock sort of thing.
Yep.
But I could wake up at 3 a.m. and just have an idea and then start like writing it. It could come really late at night when I'm sort of tired. It can be from random things, and then I'll just start sort of working, or, there'll be times where I'm like, okay, I know my brain's sort of scattered, so maybe I'll go back to gym now, or, I'll wake up feeling really good in the morning, so I'll do some work before I go to gym and ruin that routine just because I'm feeling fresh. All those things are really good for me to be able to harness, and, it doesn't affect the delivery, and I pull it off. But
and you'll often, you'll put into the Google chat, okay, I'm done for the day. I had an early start. Great.
Yeah.
Good.
But a lot of workplaces who just think about the 9 to 5, they lose a lot of that hyper focus on a lot of that productivity and those big bursts, because we know even for one of our other colleagues that they get a lull, and then around 3 p.m. or maybe even later, it kind of goes up. And they're lucky that some of our peer support groups most of them happen in the evening, so they need to be in line for that. So it kind of works with their natural flow sometimes on some days, but I think for anyone, if they can really understand, I think it's different to just chronological clock in terms of like, am I not chronological? Anyway, look, like whether you're an early bird or you're a late owl or whatever the case may be, to balance kind of your expectations around output aligned to those. And in addition to that, to be comfortable, to your point, that if you can work with flexibility in an organisation, it's not like having this belief that if you're actually online at 4:55
5 p.m., you've had a productive work day. And I think that we do understand why there is a comfort that gets driven in organisations around those requirements of clocking on and clocking off or however many hours, but also to recognise productivity can look like it's not productive. It makes no sense. So let me kind of clarify that. My fiance is neurodivergent, late diagnosed. He needs a whole lot more downtime than me. I don't enjoy downtime nearly as much as he does. And one of the things that I have really worked out in spending more time with him is that my view of productivity comes often from doing things. And I want to recognize that from a cultural perspective, there's been a whole shift to this element of your importance is connected to your busyness.
Yeah.
So this busyness badge that we all put on and we go, look at me, I'm so important because I'm so busy. And we align that busyness to output.
Yeah.
Whereas for a neurodivergent person who might be more likely to be introverted, that downtime is actually really productive because what it's enabling them to do is to adequately rest and recover. That then drives a whole lot more productivity from the back of that. And so if we really recognise that productivity does also equate to resting appropriately, then I think that creates an environment for a lot of people to do really well, both at work and at home.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm probably in a similar boat to you where, by keeping busy and doing is kind of how I view being productive and everything. But, when I was mentioning that, I'd wake up at certain times and I'll sort of work knowing where that wave is.
Yeah.
It also comes down to understanding sort of what brainwave you're at. So, whether I think they are alpha, is it alpha, beta, delta and theta?
And there's a gamma
and gamma,
well.
yeah. Or that maybe, yeah. But sort of realizing that different states of mind are better for different projects. So I think it's theta, which is the one that's best for creativity, and that's the one that Einstein used to try and do his meditative, practices to get into. So I know that, that comes when you're sort of in that sort of almost sleepy state or early stages in the morning. So that's when I'll often do the creative writing, and I'll do, or if I need like just sit there and I'm just brainstorming something creatively, I'll do this sort of work. It's also, about understanding, what that wave actually means. And
and it comes back to our comment, which is it's about normalizing or making more frequent those conversations that just goes, I'm feeling really tired. I'm not feeling myself right now. I need a bit of a brain break, or my brain's just not doing it like the brain version that's going to do this fantastic work for me. And that I think does drive well-being, right? Yes, it drives productivity, but it also drives well-being. And that's just as important for anyone in any environment. How do you actually demonstrate that the welfare of your team is just as important as their productivity?
Yeah, which is not something I experienced until working with you. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Because, the whole burnout and working myself sick, I did that once or twice in my last careers.
Twice.
Okay, well, my next question then is in regards to sort of the reform and advocacy side of the conversation. So I'd like to know, if you had the authority to change one thing about how workplaces treated adjustments, what would you change first, and what should employers be advocating for?
The one thing that I would really love to have a solution for, there's been conversations about this earlier on the podcast, is the process of disclosure. And so you and I both know that we obviously recognise personal choice, and we always advocate for safety first. So someone should only disclose when they feel safe to do so. But that disclosure process, the duty, the burden, whatever language you want to use, unfortunately, it's always going to sit with the individual themselves unless there is a mechanism that kind of changes the way those conversations can evolve. And so we've got a great resource on the website. We've got the disclosure flowchart that you and our wonderful colleague Zara did together, which kind of steps through essentially, are you safe? Do you need this? Will you, can you, should you? There's also a wonderful resource there in terms of how you might structure some of those conversations, starting with a strength-based approach. I thrive when, or I do best when, and this means that. We know that people, when they go through that recruitment process, are often questioning, do I disclose during the writing of the application? Do I disclose during the screening process? Do I disclose during my interview? Do I disclose before I sign my contract? Do I disclose in my first working day? And I think the answer to that is always very different. So if there was a way in which organisations could create the environment where they were actually seeking for people to choose to do that in a manner that was available to them with ease and simplicity and respect, I think that would be really powerful. I think what happens wholeheartedly is that, and Sandra Tom Jones talks about this, sometimes when people only choose to disclose when things haven't gone well for them, and that can make it really hard. I've definitely seen environments where people feel nervous about disclosure, and yet it becomes a really empowering thing, because the best thing that's then happened to them is their manager has said to them, oh, okay, mate, I just need to ask, what can I do for you? And like even just that one question, what can I do for you, or what do you need from me, is incredibly empowering. And it's such an easy question to ask. So if I had that magic wand, it would be creating environments that it was actually part of the process, and that people were looking to kind of understand whether they were working with someone who was identifying as being neurodivergent and what would work well for them. I think the other thing that I would love to change, and we talk about this, is language. And language is really hard in the neurodivergent community, and we need to 100% respect personal choice. But even in terms of workplace adjustments or reasonable accommodations, they tend towards the negative connotations of like things that you need, as opposed to performance enhancers, because I know wholeheartedly 100% through lived experience that really simple, tactical, practical techniques and tools can absolutely create an environment where your performance can go from here to here. And I learned that in a really safe environment by kind of needing to lead a neurodivergent team. And then I began to realize the more I can do this, like the better for me, because extraordinary things can then happen. And so we use performance enhancers because it's actually creating and welcoming that environment where people do better and they thrive, and the organisation benefits because they go, oh, a performance enhancer, why would I not want to investigate what that could actually be? So I would really love us to think about changing language and really thinking about how do we create roles for neurodivergent people that are targeted towards neurodivergent people that are outside those traditional streams that organisations tend to think about, whether it might be in IT or data or things that involve those more commonly recognised autistic traits, but actually really going, I want to have a balanced workforce. And part of that balance is the neurotypical versus the neurodivergent, not versus, but, like that both are represented in my team or in my leadership table.
Yeah. Okay. I think you make a really good point. Something you've made me sort of think on when you were highlighting the language is, I imagine a large part of that's going to be through the onboarding process, and whether it's the direct application or even just the job ad. But I imagine on an application, if you just had in your application kind of like a section where you allowed people to build their workspace.
Yeah.
Don't ask them for adjustments, but go, would you prefer a seated desk or a standing desk?
100%.
Would you prefer a laptop or a desktop? Do you prefer, and just have it a selection.
Would you benefit from having speech to technology?
Yeah.
So you don't even have to say yes because I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah.
One of our lovely partner organisations, one of their team members, she has, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, but they have a hot desking, but she has a permanent hot desk. So they're within an office which is permanent, which is a hot desking arrangement, but she gets to go to the same hot desk each time that she's actually in the building. So she doesn't have a permanent desk, she has a permanent hot desk.
Yeah.
And to your point, which is if we just said to people, what are the tools that are going to be available to you without necessarily having to say, I need that because I'm autistic, or I want that because I'm autistic, or I benefit from that because I'm autistic. Just having those mechanisms for anyone, neurotypical or neurodivergent, to create a work environment that might work best for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if people, if workplaces thought about creating their actual working environments a bit more to the individual, because they have to go through that cost and that expense of laying out
Totally.
all the things anyway. So that selection process that we're talking about, it would allow them to not provide the neurodivergent person with tools and stuff in that office space that they're not going to use, or that they really don't like, and that it's going to be not advantageous to them. And then you can be really sort of selective with how you build those spaces. And then maybe if they were to, if we think about a lot of common office spaces, there's sort of this open floor plan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if everyone then had their own little pods that they, felt comfortable in, and then they were allowed to design that, and they, it's built with all the things that they selected through the criteria, and then they walk into that, but like they've built this around me for what I need. Like, that's going to make me feel included. That's going to make me feel comfortable.
Yeah, and valued.
And I'm not going to have to say anything. But then, if you really know autism, I could tell that person's on the spectrum probably by some of the question, the ways that they'd answer that question.
Yeah.
There'd be a few things that like line up that would be like, okay, maybe that person's neurodivergent, and, I'll bear that in mind. And then, just be like, okay, well, I'm going to practice more accessible communication overall.
Yep.
Doesn't need to highlight anything.
I also want to recognise that for organisations, we're often talking about things that don't actually cost anything. And even in terms of, because that element of, if you want to think about it quite logically, in terms of like input versus output, like in terms of my own work approaches, those things that I tend to do now, that I do in our environment, the input costs to me are a whole lot less than the output benefits to the organisation. So often I think organisations might get into this belief system that inclusion is difficult and it's costly and it's time consuming. And I think it would be wonderful if organisations actually challenge themselves, how can we make accessible environments where neurodivergent people thrive and their neurotypical colleagues, whilst recognising that it doesn't have to be costly.
Yeah, I don't think any of the adjustments that I've asked for have really cost us anything. I know, well, I mean, the key one, I think I asked for a program coordinator or someone to sort of support me and take away some of the administrative elements that I don't really thrive in.
Mm-hmm.
But, yes, okay, that's a cost for the organisation, but then, they're overseeing and supporting other things. So it's not just a Jacob cost. It's like that's a organisational improvement, but, stems around an adjustment for Jacob. And look what having Zara's done. We've done so much more. We're able to deliver a lot more.
Yep.
Less falls through the cracks, and it works really well.
Mm-hmm.
So, taking that, for example, in my scenario of build your office, if there's other things like, would you prefer like a buddy or a body doubling support person, to help your meetings or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely.
All these things.
Or even if you can find that organically. And what I mean by that is, like if there's just someone who you can kind of go, actually, you're really great for my nervous system, and we kind of co-regulate really productively together. How do you build those mechanisms where people can create those environments and those teams where they're going to have people around them that enable them to do well in that work situation without necessarily having to document it or create a procedure around it? Like, how do you find environments where people can kind of go, great, well, that person's really strong logistically and administratively, and that person's got a wonderful creative sense. And if you pair them together, then they can produce so much.
Yeah, which it's a shame a lot of people, like a lot of workplaces, don't seem to do much because, when I think about, these adjustments and a lot of the things that can produce performance enhancers, there are a lot of the things that people in higher positions often get to implement on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we think of like a corporate CEO who might have an assistant or a planner and someone managing this, if you're lucky enough to have someone, if you're really financially well off and you've got someone managing your health, then you've got someone managing everything. Well, they're the exact same sort of supports that the autistic community need help managing.
Yep.
But we look down upon those and go, oh, they're adjustments. I have to change everything for that one individual. But that's a hypocrisy, because we're quite literally doing that for the one individual who's at the top of the organisation, just not the remaining of them. But then if you did that and provided everyone with those same scaffolding of supports, you'd have a hyper productive team all round.
Yeah, we know wholeheartedly that the science does show us that quite commonly those adjustments that you can make in workplaces that are traditionally seen as reasonable accommodations or workplace adjustments benefit the majority of the workforce.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point.
No one ever complains that they've been given too many instructions. Like, if you don't want to read all the instructions, that's absolutely your choice. But most people benefit from clear, contextualized communication in a way that's delivered to them in a simple, concise manner.
Yeah. And I might know myself, I don't mind if there's no communication and you just give me a to-do list. I love that. That makes it real clear.
Yeah.
People might be blunt, but no, I love it. I even say, here's my link to the to-do. Put it in. Yeah. All for that. Okay, well, moving on to the last part of our segment, which I have called Guest Choice. Is there any question that you might have in mind for me? So whether it's a comment or...
I do. I have a couple of questions, actually. So we know, of course, for those who are regular listeners / watchers, that your first time that you disclosed was when you joined AV, because, of course, we recruit for lived experience, so you actually had to, and that's a really positive thing. If there was a manager or a leader who had an employee who had just come to them and said, okay, my name's Jacob, I would like to share with you that I am autistic, or I am ADHD, or I'm neurodivergent, what is one thing that almost any manager or leader could do at that point that you think would be useful?
Go into it with compassion and authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
No one expects them to know. I don't expect any manager to know, maybe yourself, because you nature of the organisation. But any other role, I've never expected the manager to have to know about autism, and I wouldn't expect them to know. So, that cluelessness is fine.
Yep.
But yeah, just be open and supportive, and just learn from the individual, and don't go looking at it from a deficit side of things, because they're just going to sort of shut down, and just try and learn what they can do for the organisation, as well as what the organisation can do for them. If I was to go into an org, I'd know the challenges that I might have around managing my autism in that org.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm applying it and I'm looking at overcoming that, it's because I'm drawn and I'm passionate about the org and what the org's sort of doing.
Yeah, I really like that, which I think what I'm distilling from that is that absolutely the best thing that you can get is someone who's willing to ask questions. And I think, building on your comment, the other really empowering thing is to, as much as possible, what I don't mean is put down assumptions, is do away with assumptions. So I think, we benefit from the fact that, I benefit from the fact that I am surrounded by neurodivergent people, but they're all very unique and they're all very different people. I parent two sons. Like most parents, both of my kids are very different. I don't think that you don't get many parents who go, yeah, I've got two kids and they're exactly the same.
Yeah, no.
That doesn't seem to happen in families, does it? So that ability to ask questions, I think, is really key. The ability to recognise that you might have an assumption because you've met some neurodivergent people is really key. And just as much so, your comfort in trying to find a way to support, to work with, to lead that person, and your willingness to then need to change that. And so I think what can happen in organisations, and definitely for individual employees, for those that are particularly late diagnosed or late discovered, they're kind of like, I don't even know what will actually help me thrive? I don't know, because they've become so accustomed to pushing their way through, or they're very good at masking, or they're very good at mirroring, so that they just believe that my experience at work has to be like this because I've known no different. So as an example, my lovely fiance, from a sensory profile, has incredibly great hearing, but that great hearing can sometimes be very problematic for him. And we spoke for months with me going, oh, some people in the community like to wear earplugs on loops and things. And he was really resistant to that. And I'm not sure why, but that was his choice. He was really resistant to it. And now that he's worked out that actually it makes a whole lot of difference for him both at work and outside of work, he's more comfortable in doing that. So I think from both an employer and an employee perspective, be prepared to do trial and error. Like, let's try this, and then does that work for you? And then let's try that, and does that work for you? And as opposed to, right, we've had one conversation and we've sat down and we've agreed all these performance enhancers and they're set now and they're kind of set and forget. Because we also want to recognise that a lot of the experience in the neurodivergent community, to which we touched on earlier, is support needs change. And that can be, in any day, in any moment, in any given time. And so as much as we know that from a diagnostics perspective, we have technically 3 levels of diagnosis, but even you sometimes say, well, I am this, but on certain days, in certain moments, I might get that diagnosis. And so they're not, yes, according to the DSM, they are precise, but that precision, I think those lines are not necessarily black and white, they're 100% grey. So if you are leading someone who's neurodivergent, or you have a neurodivergent family member, ask lots of questions and be prepared to challenge your assumptions, and be prepared to kind of go back in and go, okay, well, we're 6 months down the track, or we're 6 weeks down the track. Like, is this still working for you? What should we continue to do? What should we stop, start, and continue is a really easy model to use when you're working with people, and to open up those conversations.
Yeah. And I think another important thing that employers could probably do too is, if they don't know how to have that conversation, they can simply just connect with others and just say, hey, my employees told me that they're autistic, and I really don't know what to do with that, but I want to be respectful and try and make it comfortable for them. Can you, help us figure out how to do so?
Very much so.
Like, I've never, we don't get emails like that, but if it was that genuine and that like just authentic and interpersonal, then yeah, we jump at that opportunity to help that organisation, and
very much so.
We'd probably put them up on a pedestal and showcase them, on our platforms, just because of
that desire to help, desire to support, and to create an environment that is genuinely inclusive.
Yeah, but I think to break my answer to your question down in like a one sentence, is one really important thing I wouldn't do is use the literature language, or like diagnostic language. In every of like don't go, oh yeah, I learned about this, or like the DSM says this, or as soon as you start making them feel like the doctor makes them feel, the conversation's kind of gone out the window. So I think it's just talk to them individually, and we know that quote that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Coming into those conversations, being like, oh yeah, I know this person, or everyone knows that I'm someone with autism, and then that's their experience of that person with autism.
Yeah.
Or they've seen Rain Man or something.
Yeah.
And it's just really, this stereotypical, really shallow view.
Yep.
And yeah, I think it's just.
And we know that people will always kind of resonate towards ease, right? And so what I mean by that is that if they have this perception that if you have autism, that means that, and that, then they're going to make it easy for themselves to align yourself to that. So it does warrant lots of open conversations as much as possible. And to your point, from a language perspective, ask people, like, how do you refer to yourself? Do you say I'm autistic? Do you say I have autism? Do you say do you use the, the technical diagnosis? Whatever your preference is.
Yep. Yeah, just generally asking, those things. One small thing that you do really well is even just asking, how's this, or how's, when stuff's going on with the family or whatever.
Yeah.
Other bosses or managers don't ask those sort of questions. It's like, oh, okay, is it going to affect your work? There's that. And it's just like, okay,
Yeah.
what does that mean for me? But okay, moving on to the final minute. As you know, I like to use this minute for you to either follow on and continue through a comment that you didn't get to share as I've been asking you questions, or to either bust a myth that you might have in mind. But I think the question I want to lead with is, from everything we've spoken about in this episode and the topic at large, what's one thing that gives you hope about the future?
One thing that gives me hope is I think that there is a genuine move, and maybe I'm just surrounded by wonderful people, but I think there is a genuine move to really understand what the neurodivergent experience is. Lived experience is really important. There is a genuine move to create environments where people can thrive with their neurodivergent. And there is a whole lot more, I don't want to say enthusiasm, about kind of exploring whether you might be neurodivergent. Literally this morning, promised you this morning on the day of the recording, my dear young son said to me, his boyfriend's just been going through the diagnostic process. He said to me, "Oh, good news." I said, "Oh, yes." He goes, "Yeah, he got diagnosed with both." And I said, "Oh, okay, great." So he's now got an autism and an ADHD diagnosis. But he framed it in those exact words. He said, "Good news." I think that is phenomenal. Now, I can't speak for the individual concerned as to whether that was good news because it was really comforting for him, or it was good news because he kind of was like, yeah, I knew that about myself, now it's confirmed, or whatever the reason it's deemed good news. It's still wonderful that that was the actual language that he used. And it may just be that my son's like, great, my boyfriend's neurodivergent too. This is going to make life a whole lot easier for us. But, he was neurodivergent yesterday before he got the diagnosis this morning, as we know. So that gives me hope that I think there's a genuine desire to create environments which are more inclusive, and that people will now seek to understand themselves better. I think if we go back in a few generations, there was a whole lot more instances of people recognizing their differences but wanting to hide that, and wanting to push their way through. And what really gives me hope is that for those that I've seen, in terms of those that are really close to me around that late diagnosis, the more they understand and the more that they can identify with those tools or those techniques or those mechanisms that keep them regulated or enable them to have more spoons at the end of the day, the better for everybody. My eldest son wandered past my desk the other day, and I said to him, "Oh, I've been doing this. Do you want to have a look at it?" And he just looked at me. And it was first thing in the morning, and he said to me, "I don't have enough spoons for that." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then, he wandered off. But he was articulate enough to go, "I know what's in front of me today, and I'm just not going to enter into this conversation with you right now." And it gives me hope that that language becomes more accessible and it's more frequent and it's used more comfortably.
Yeah. And to sort of plug our friend Kyriakis Gold from Autistic Pride, autism is trending is what I think you're saying there, and which is great. And it is trending. I just hope that, the trend we're seeing doesn't kind of take away from people's experiences, because I know a lot of people seem to identify now, if people without a diagnosis, or a lot of people now identify being like, "Oh, I'm autistic." And
yeah, I think it was one of the professors from the OTARC Centre. So I won't name in case I very poorly paraphrase this particular person. But she was talking a little while ago on a LinkedIn post about how, well, there's so many more autistic people now. There's so many more autistic people. And the analogy that she shared, that may or may not have been her own, was that, well, when our telescopes got strong enough and we saw more stars in the sky, there wasn't actually more stars in the sky. They were simply just more visible for us. And I thought that's a really beautiful analogy. I do not genuinely believe there are more autistic people now than there was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 100 years ago. I just believe we have a better understanding of how to identify those people, both in terms of those that might get a diagnosis or those that come to a self-identification. And that brings an enormous amount of hope for me.
Great. Well, that encapsulates our conversation for today. That's the time done. So thank you everyone for coming again and joining us and listening to this episode. If you want to stay connected with us, jump over to the website, check out the podcast page and everything we do. Leslie, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Jacob.
Goodbye, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. These topic spotlights only open the conversation, while our Career Network group and aligned topic touchstone meetings aim to reinforce and reflect on the themes. As our community's voice, I'm greatly aware that my voice, while relatable, must remain fueled by those I serve. That's what the World of Work ecosystem aims to do. Simply click the links to find out more. Thanks for listening.